Så klockan är 17:00 och vi vill hälsa er hjärtligt välkomna till kvällens samtal med Palestinas ambassadör i Sverige. Det här eventet kommer att vara på engelska när vi påbörjar samtalet med ambassadören. Vi vill också säga att har man frågor eller funderingar så är man hjärtligt välkommen att skriva ner sina frågor antingen i Zoom-rummet eller på Facebook-sidan, Socialdemokraternas Facebook-sida. Vi kommer även att som sagt sända det här på Facebook så att det finns möjlighet att följa eventet där också. Som ni vet, Socialdemokraterna har en lång tradition, lång historia av att stötta palestinierna eftersom det är det handlar om rättvisa i grunden och internationell solidaritet. Så att det var en av anledningarna att vi vill ha det här samtalet för att öka kunskapen och kännedomen om vad som händer där nere. Och vi hoppas också att så många som möjligt engagerar sig i Socialdemokraterna för att stötta palestinernas kamp. Innan vi påbörjar samtalet med ambassadören tänker vi släppa in Nordisk hjälp som ska berätta om sin verksamhet och hur man kan stötta framförallt Gaza. Så Sara Zeidan, välkommen.
Tack så mycket. Hello and thank you again for the invitation. My name is Sarah and I'm a representative for the NGO Nordic Aid, eller som vi säger här i Sverige, Nordisk hjälp. The NGO has taken a number of different projects in Asia, Africa, and some in Europe. The main objective of our project is assisting refugees, assisting women in strengthening their democracy and health condition of children. In addition of eviction of water wells in areas where people are struggling to have clean water. At the moment, despite the ongoing other projects, Nordic Aid is focusing on the Palestinian issue. Nordic Aid has established an office and we have a union in Ramallah to, keep a local check on developments that is happening there. Since the beginning, before we had that, we have an ongoing discussion with the residents of what they need, other than that we think they need, which has an historia of being a problem with NGOs before. We currently have sponsorship projects for over 1,000 children, wherein 700 of those live in Palestine, and the other 400 are Palestinian refugees living in countries like Lebanon. We have since 2009 transported 11 fully equipped ambulances to Gaza. And that's what we're asking for your support with now. We are now collecting money for ambulances, medical supplies, assistance devices for people with functional differences, and pharmaceuticals of all kinds to Gaza. So yeah, we're seeking assistance with the fundraiser to boost up this project, and as much help as possible is more than welcome. We have a Swish number, but I can also share the screen, I think. Share screen. Can you see the Swish and that? Yeah. Yep. So there's no limit for how much you can donate, whatever works. And we also, of course, always welcome volunteers and sharing this information on your platform. There are very different ways to contribute. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's really important that we show all kind of support and solidarity with the Palestinian people at the moment. So I hope all of you can swish or transfer the amount of money that you are available of sending. So
yes. Exactly. It's they're not only living under occupation. It's a catastrophe after the war. So all help that we can get. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, Nordic Help, for sharing information about your operations, but also about how we can help the Palestinian people and especially the people in Gaza. Thank you, Sarah. Dear Ambassador,
Hala Fariz.
Hala Fariz,
We're gonna stop sharing
yeah.
Sarah's screen now. There.
Yeah, perfect.
And
thank you so much. So, dear Ambassador, you're most welcome to Luleå and to the Social Democrats in Luleå, even if it's a digital event. But you have been in Luleå before. Is that true?
Yes, thank you very much for having me virtually this time. I have been in Luleå, I think, twice or 3 times, and I look forward to maybe also meeting you again in the future in person.
Absolutely.
okay, we will start a little bit with the historic background, and many might not know how this aggression has started. So please, can you tell us a short bit of background about this conflict?
Yes, of course. Indeed, the conflict did not start with the latest aggression. It was the latest aggression on our people, and not just on as some have called it in the press. Maybe I read a lot that the war on Hamas. Of course, this aggression against the Palestinian people started almost 100 years ago. More specifically, also in 1948, with the dispossession of the Palestinian people and the depriving us from practicing our right to self-determination up till now, of course. And another major event that took place was 54 years ago, which we recently crossed this 54th year on the 5th of June with the war of 1967, when the rest of historic Palestine was occupied and continues to be occupied until today. Actually, this occupation that has been going on has been transformed into a colonial, because occupation by definition legally in international law is a temporary situation. Now, this temporary situation has turned into a permanent situation, especially with the policy adopted, whereby we have seen it transformed into a settler colonial occupation with the full sense of the word, which has led, of course, several human rights organizations, lately Human Rights Watch, and of course several others like B'Tselem before, and many human rights experts into talking about apartheid, that there is an apartheid regime that exists from the river to the sea against the Palestinian people mainly. And we have to, I think the time has come to really describe things the way they are. What we do have is this system of discrimination, this occupation since, I mean, this aggression since 73 years ago has been based on displacement and replacement of the Palestinian people. So to come into how this latest aggression came about, we just go back 1 month before the 10th of May, to see how the manifestation of this discriminatory policy was more than ever more aggressive in East Jerusalem, trying to evict people by force, and not really evict, because eviction implies that there are other owners, but rather to dispossess these people of their homes in which they have lived for centuries.
course.
And some would like to think maybe this, yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I get a question. In this region, of course, this conflict affects all this region, but how would you say the neighboring countries responded to this, or historically, or?
Yeah, well, actually, I think that what happened during that month of confrontation in East Jerusalem, as well as other confrontations that were going on around the West Bank, has shown that there was a very strong, very strong feelings that erupted in the neighboring countries on the public level, in the public opinion level, and actions, of course, of solidarity, of protest against the brutality of Israel, both before and during and after that 11-day aggression. On the official level, of course, also there was coming together in the form of meetings and summits specifically designed to talk about how to stop this aggression, how to take measures to protect the people in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Yeah. It's really important to, exactly as you have been doing, to underline the historical context of the conflict, because it's, I mean, when we have seen the debate on social media and among the public, both here in Sweden and in other countries, this lack of knowledge, the historic knowledge, that makes like the whole conflict is about Hamas and some rockets, and yeah, that's a shame, because it's an extremely complicated conflict. It's not a conflict between two equal parts. We have Israel occupying the Palestinian territories since almost forever now, and it's really important to actually go through the historical background about the conflict before you actually can discuss the recent events, because the recent events, they are not even small part of the whole situation. So yeah.
Yes, I will just comment on that to add that in spite of the lack of maybe historical knowledge, and I agree that some do not really know how this evolved into what it is right now. But in spite of that, what we have seen in public opinion in some European capitals, in Australia, in the US, as a response to the brutal force and the carnage that was used against the civilian population in Gaza, is just further proof that this is about human rights. This is about the concept of equality and justice. And we heard people chanting on the streets everywhere in the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands, freedom for Palestine, even those who don't really know what has been going on. And this, I think we need to concentrate on these concepts that join people. And this is also, again, further proof that for those who thought that Palestine is not important anymore and we got tired of of this conflict, because the Palestinians don't want to accept a solution and all of that, which we read often sometimes in the press here about about Palestine. This all proved to be false. That yes, Palestine is important and Jerusalem is important, and as I often say, the extreme harm that 4 years of the Trump administration has done, and not just to Palestine, but to major issues in the world that are of concern to worldwide, like the climate, like the Iran deal, like so many other things that go into the essence of multilateralism, and a lot of damage was done to them. In spite of all of that, still the people, the public opinion knows, how to call a spade, really. And but again, I have to also say that we heard a lot, especially from leaders around the world and from some political parties who chose to adopt Netanyahu's ideas and himself and the extreme right, which exists in Israel right now, and talk only about Israel's right to defend itself. Actually, this should cause a feeling of being offended when we hear something like this. Yes, it's every right of a sovereign nation to defend itself, but a country that has turned into an occupier has immediately lost this. It's not a sovereign country. It's a country that occupies another. And therefore, what Israel was doing was not self-defense.
No.
They were targeting the civilian population and the infrastructure in the Gaza Strip with the intent of causing extreme harm to the population and the infrastructure.
Exactly, and that's a very good, smooth transition to part two about the current situation in Gaza and in Jerusalem. We can start with Jerusalem, and particularly Sheikh Jarrah. What's happening there?
Yes.
What's the background of the event?
Okay. So the background of that is that these families in Sheikh Jarrah and in other parts of East Jerusalem, like Silwan, which is now also under a lot of pressure, with the same threat of dispossessing people and demolishing homes. And this has been going on in Silwan, by the way, for the past few years. Now thousands are threatened with dispossession. But to get back to Sheikh Jarrah, where it was under the spotlight in the past month, I should say that now it continues to be under siege. It is sealed off from the rest of Jerusalem. And a few days ago, journalists were attacked and beaten, and some of them were arrested and suffered bruises and injuries as a result of the harsh treatment. And only because they were there to cover the news. People are not allowed to go in and out, especially journalists and also those who come in solidarity, to stay with the people in solidarity and trying to help them, to protect them also. Because at the same time, when these people are being harassed, the settler groups and mobs are allowed to roam about in Sheikh Jarrah, threatening the families. And I think there was a video that went viral on social media for a settler standing there and talking to Miss Kurd, I think, who was arrested, by the way, yesterday, together with her brother, and then released. But anyway, this settler telling her, I am here to take you home.
Exactly.
And she said, no, you are not allowed. And then he responds, if I don't steal it, someone else will.
Exactly.
This is the kind of mentality that our people are subjected to in East Jerusalem and in many other areas, in Silwan specifically, and other parts of the occupied territory.
Was it your
So
opinion they targeted journalists or made it difficult for journalists to be in this region?
yeah, the soldiers are there, and they attacked the journalists. Some of them were hit by shrapnel from the stun grenades that the soldiers were using. Others were physically attacked. One of them is a journalist from Al Jazeera. Her arm was broken and she suffered bruises in her head, etc. Because when they arrested her, they physically hit her, they abused her, they kicked her in the head, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of situation that continues. Add to it that the government is allowing the settlers to go ahead with the so-called flag march in Jerusalem, in the same areas that are extremely tense, and that march was, they had to change its route earlier in May, and now they are allowing it to go ahead tomorrow. So and they're inviting, more provocation and incitement from the settlers, because these guys, that's what they do usually. And this is only one form of provocation.
Exactly, and that's
In other.
I mean, that's really interesting,
Yeah.
because I mean, what's happening in Jerusalem, in Silwan, in Sheikh Jarrah, it's actually not new for the people living there. It's not new for the Palestinian families. I mean, during the recent decades, we have seen how people are thrown out from their homes that they have lived in for a long time, how they have been harassed and beaten up from the Israeli, both soldiers and settlements. So what's interesting is that now the Israeli military force can't hide that anymore. I mean, the social media and how we share information, it's actually a big threat to the Israeli war machine, because people everywhere in the world can see what's happening every day. And that's why the public opinion, the pro-Palestinian public opinion, is increasing, as you mentioned, throughout Europe, but also in the US and Australia and other places too. That's because they can't hide what they have been doing for decades and decades. So, yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. This has been really important, because now every person can be a journalist in her own right or his own right, and take videos and take pictures, and these pictures don't lie. They say things as they are. The important thing is that it is really essential that the public opinion see this and do something about it, because only pressure on the leaders that can change positions and help us do something, and more specifically take measures in order for accountability at last to hit Israel. I mean, it has gone on for so long with total impunity, and it's only because of lack of political courage to where you see any abuse like that and violations of human rights and international law have been met with repercussions in different parts of the world. We still see it every day, except for Israel.
Exactly.
Except for Israel. It
Yeah.
is time, and I think the latest developments may have helped in bringing this closer. And that's why also it is sad to see that several countries, also mainly in Europe, in members of the EU, have spoken against the ICC decision to start investigating violations of human rights and possible war crimes and crimes against humanity in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Exactly.
And the same countries voted against the latest decision taken by the UN Human Rights Council to form an independent, ongoing commission of inquiry to investigate exactly the same, human rights and war crimes, etc. In not just in the occupied Palestinian territory, but also in Israel, discrimination and human rights abuse. It's sad, we have to, it's very important that the public opinion continue with the pressure so that leaders will change course and stop protecting Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
We got a question from the chat I think we can take right now. We all know that it's important struggle is the public opinion in Sweden. Are there any strategies to involve or engage to gain the Swedish public? I think a question about your work here.
Yeah. Well, as I said, maybe before we started, but I have to say that I have always welcomed every opportunity to meet. Of course, this has diminished a little bit, and now we're resorting to virtual meetings because of the pandemic. But I'm talking about throughout the years, I have always tried to meet, especially with the students, university students, and others who can, be influential. I have always encouraged those willing to go and visit Palestine, the occupied Palestinian territory, especially that when you go there, you get to understand what it means. When we talk about the wall, what does it mean, the wall? Where is that wall? It is not protecting Israel, it's separating families and Palestinian families, Palestinian villages from each other. What does it mean when we talk about settlements that are in the heart of our cities and villages? What does it mean that there are specific roads for the settlers and for the Jews and others for the rest of the people? So all of these things, it really helps when you see them, when you interact with the Palestinian people, when you see how things are, how Gaza has been cut off and besieged and blocked from the rest of the Palestinian territory for 14 years, 15 almost now.
I think
So,
made a remark earlier about there not being equal, the both sides. And I think that's one of the parts that is spread through media, is that sometimes it seems like there are two equal parts in this conflict.
Yes, that's what I say. I think it is also very important to talk about these concepts, I mean, in a country like Sweden that has even officially, if you say they have acted on the principle, they recognize the state of Palestine because they have been supporting the two-state solution, although that it's going nowhere, but that's besides the point. But they acted on principle and to give some hope that things will get better. But of course, that was a very brave and morally commendable position. But I think we need to continue to also be aware that the Palestinian statehood is not under is not subject to negotiations. This is our right.
Exactly.
And this state exists already. Of course, Sweden recognized that there are others that haven't done that yet. They have to do it, and they have to realize that it exists by our natural right. However, it is under occupation. This is the difference here. So it's important for the public to continue to remember, for the public opinion at large, that it's a matter of justice, it's a matter of equality and integrity, dignity for the people. That is their natural right, and that there is no people better or above any other. There is no suffering that is more important than the other. So yes, the Palestinian people are also deserving of the same basic human rights as the Swedish people, as the Vietnamese people, as any other people.
Absolutely.
We received a new question from the chat, so
yes, absolutely. But before we have been discussing Jerusalem and the events there, I think we should also discuss Gaza, because the focus
yes, of course,
very fast to Gaza. And as you know, 66 children have been killed by the Israeli military force, and a vast majority of the victims in Gaza, they are civilians. And in your opinion, why has the world community been so silent during the events? Not maybe on the public level, because we have seen how people have been interacting with the situation, but I mean on maybe the government level, has been very quiet.
Yes. Yeah, of course, it is quite sad, and it's true what you are saying, that the public opinion surpassed by far the official level of that. And to remind the audience that the manifestation of this was very clear at the Security Council, for example, that was not allowed to come out with even a statement for 4 times they met, and they just, were not really enabled to come out with a statement. In some European capitals, even public opinion was suppressed. Demonstrators were attacked and forbidden to. We haven't seen demonstrations in Sweden because of the limitations of the health situation and the pandemic, and this is understandable, even though there were some demonstrations, etc., and different ways of expression. But the interesting thing, I think, to note is that in spite of this, and this we all know that in the international fora, of course, we are all for that, and we are, unlike Israel, we respect the United Nations and its different bodies, and we continue to believe that. But we are at the same time aware that the superpowers, mainly the US, are in control of these bodies, and we do have hundreds of resolutions by the Security Council itself, not least the resolution of the 2016-2334, which talked about occupation and settlements and the wall and the rest of it, that were not implemented. Why? Because Israel does not respect these or abide by them, and it is protected. Israel is protected. So it's the same vicious circle, if you like.
Exactly.
And that's why it's important for the public opinion everywhere to continue to put pressure.
Exactly.
The official, I think even the official level, even the US was forced to act when they felt the pressure from the public opinion, when demonstrations were in New York, in Chicago, in Washington later on. So what they did was that to have Egypt and other Arab countries, of course, Jordan, Egypt, and Qatar, but mainly Egypt, discuss and arrive to a ceasefire, which was important to stop the bloodshed and devastation directed against.
How much can we dare to trust that the recent Israeli aggression in Gaza has actually stopped? Is there any risk for new casualties?
No, hasn't. Of course, no. That's why when I started speaking, I said the aggression has been ongoing, and it is still ongoing. Only what we wanted to see was that Netanyahu takes back his jets and cannons back to where they were, which were like few kilometers away from Gaza. And by the way, a lot of misrepresentation of the situation of the Gaza Strip. We see it sometimes by officials that spoken out by officials that Gaza, well, has it's not under occupation. Of course, by law, the Gaza Strip is still part of the occupied Palestinian territory, which includes, of course, East Jerusalem.
Exactly.
This is the definition according to international law.
We had a question from the chat earlier. It is very similar to one of ours. It is a new coalition government has been formed in Israel, marking the end of Netanyahu's 12 years as a prime minister of Israel. Will that make any difference for the Palestinians?
I will simply answer by saying Bennett, who is about to be the next prime minister, is a settler, extreme, from the extreme right, who has been very vocal about his rejection for any sort of either stopping the settlement expansion, or he has been very vocal for the annexation. He has been very vocal against any sort of agreement that entails ending the occupation, etc., against the two-state solution. And I would also add to this that the Labour Party, who is now part of this coalition government, which is very strange combination of everyone who could come about in order to get rid of Netanyahu, which is okay. I mean, to get rid of enough damage that he caused. But just to explain that the Labour Party itself in the last elections took off the two-state solution from their platform. So this is what we have in Israel, except for the United the let me see this. Look here, the joint list,
The Arab list, joint list. Yes.
the Arab Palestinian
Yes.
Israeli political parties. The rest of the whole spectrum. Maybe I can put Meretz a bit different from the rest.
Party.
And Meretz is part of this government, but anyway, they're all extreme right, supporting the settlers, extremist and racist and terrorist ideas and the terrorism they practice every day. And something here I want to mention. A lot was written during the past weeks and even from before, that the problem is that Hamas is a terrorist organization. First of all, we don't subscribe to this definition. Second, if you are going to define terrorism, then there are a number of those terrorist organizations from the settlers, but it's somehow, they are not, nobody dare describe them as terrorists, but they are. They have lynch mobs that went around and lynched people now during this latest confrontation. Where did they do that? They were brought from the West Bank into cities like Haifa and Al-Fahim and Lud and Jaffa to attack the Palestinian Israeli citizens.
Exactly.
Secondly, you have a country, Israel, which has installed the most racist, discriminatory law ever, which is the nation law, the Israeli nation law, which says only the Jews have the right for self-determination in this part, and they name the whole part, of course, including the West Bank.
Exactly.
And the heart of the West Bank is Jerusalem, of course. And you have all of these things that nobody talks about officially. Nobody talks about. You have these mobs from the settler organizations that go around and burn families alive, not just dispossess families and take their homes, and nobody talks about it. So we talk about it. We, after 5 or 6 years, we got the ICC to decide on starting an investigation into these crimes in the occupied territory. So, I mean, we really have to use all of these devices in order to install a change.
The situation you describe is very alarming. But in your opinion, what does the Palestinians need right now? First and foremost.
Yeah, what we need really, first of all, is to continue the process of reconciliation and ending the political division that exists, and hopefully get the help that we were promised in order to force Israel to not to put any obstacles towards having our elections. Elections have to take place in all of the occupied territory, including Jerusalem, of course, and specifically in Jerusalem. Frankly speaking, we were promised by friends and especially European friends that they will help us with this, to put pressure on Israel. But when the time came, this did not materialize. And so we had to postpone the elections. there is a wide range desire for these elections to take place. And you can tell by just knowing that 93% of those eligible for voting registered, that we had 36 lists ready and registered, and just when we were about to start. And also in the Gaza Strip, they had the highest percentage. If you take just the Gaza Strip, highest percentage of registration for elections. So in order to do this, the siege has to be lifted, but mainly we need help to do this in Jerusalem also.
Yeah.
Otherwise, nobody will agree to have elections without Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So this is what we need to do. We know that, and this is very important. But right now, to get back to the Gaza Strip, the situation is really dire, and dire does not come close to describing the situation. The trauma has been, this time, I mean, listening to some friends who live there, this latest assault was unlike anything that happened before. It lasted 11 days, but you can imagine 11 days and nights with no stop, with no respite, with no time to breathe even. The amount of ammunition thrown just cannot be imagined. Thousands and thousands of blockbusters, bumper busters, as they bunker busters. I mean, so it was, apart from the devastation, traumatizing, not just for the children, but also for the adults. Whole families were decimated, whole families. And this happened last time, but this time it was just 66 children out of 255 who fell, and the majority of all of those were civilians.
Exactly.
So the devastation is completely, widespread. Water network has been affected. Electricity has been affected. The water salination plants have been affected. Schools, clinics, apart from homes and apartments. So the urgent need now is really for lifting the siege, so that we can start to rebuild and to try to do what is needed for the Gaza Strip. Egypt is helping a lot. They have offered not just amounts of money, but I think also equipment, like to remove the rubble, etc. And Qatar. But what is needed really is to lift the siege, and
Yes, absolutely.
and of
Yeah. Yes, all the topics we have been discussing so far are so important, and they actually need much more time to actually go into detail and describe much more. But time is going really fast, and we go to the last part, and it's about Palestinian-Swedish relations. And in your opinion, how's the situation between Palestine and Sweden?
Just to say briefly that the relations go back, I mean, officially, if you like, since 1903, when the first consulate general was established in Jerusalem. But also before that, many people went to Jerusalem out of, out of religious people wanted to be in Jerusalem because of what it means, to stay there. And there was the first school built for girls was built by one of those a woman. Sorry, I forget the name right now, but I mean, it was the school still stands. There is a sign. The sign still is there, and some remnants of the school, and it falls right on the armistice line between the western part of Jerusalem and the eastern part of Jerusalem. So that was more than 100 years ago. But of course, over the years, it developed, and the first official, if you like, recognition was when the PLO was recognized, when Yasser Arafat was deceived, and that was Olof Palme, of course, who, when he met, after he met Yasser Arafat in Algeria, and he got to understand what the PLO stood for and what is it that the Palestinian people is about and what's going on. I mean, he understood the true essence of the conflict, and apart from that, moving on, the relations only developed further. And I have to also mention the role of the civil society in Sweden, all those organizations that were working first in Lebanon, at the refugee camps in Lebanon, and that have done a great deal for our people, even before there was official recognition by the Swedish leadership here, politically speaking, of course.
There was a remark in the chat previously about the latest aggression in Gaza, and they ask about different political parties, that they have different stance in this conflict, and some parties even supported the Israeli side of the conflict. And the question was, how do you think the Palestinian must develop this collaboration with the Swedish society? And it's a question from the chat.
I mean, it is really an ongoing, if you like, dialogue. That's how you develop the relations with political parties. I have to say that I've been here for many years, and I used to be able to have a dialogue with all of the political parties, except maybe one that I don't have relations with them, but all of the political parties. But since 4 or 5 years, some of them don't even want me to talk to them. I ask to speak to them, and they don't want to have anything to do with me. But still, with many others, I do have, and I maintain this in an attempt to continue to not just give the facts, but also to try to develop their position towards that. This is officially, I mean, this is part of my work. At the same time, I think that the Palestinian community also has, through their interaction, the Palestinians that are now Swedish citizens, of course, have an interaction with the public and with some political parties. Some of them are politically involved in their own communities, and you know, there is, I think, sort of all of these factors work together in order to strengthen the bonds and to explain the facts. Some Swedish political parties, sadly to say, have adopted totally the ideas and the ideas of the Israeli government, which has been Netanyahu for the past 10, 12 years. And they don't seem to see that the real problem is the occupation, the continued aggression. And by the way, I have to say something regarding the ceasefire, although maybe it's not the right place. But when I said that we worked for a ceasefire in order to stop the bloodshed. But of course, going back to ceasefire means going back to the daily violence of the occupation. It doesn't mean that back to peace again. Right. So again, I go back to the political parties. Some of them have totally adopted, even some political parties have invited on previous occasions leaders of settler organizations into the Swedish parliament, which was, I think, lamentable, to put it very diplomatically. Of course, this is a free country, but I think that some of the measures that can be taken are against such symbols of the occupation, symbols of the settlement, because there used to be an agreement along the spectrum regarding the settlements, that they are against international law, and here I recall the Council conclusions of 2009, when Sweden was presiding the Council, the European, it was their presidency. Those Council conclusions were a landmark when they talked about ending the occupation of 1967 and 2 states and settlements and that are against, international law and an obstacle to peace, and Jerusalem has to be capital for 2 states, although we insist on saying East Jerusalem, capital of Palestine. But anyway, and now when I see them, inviting settlers to Sweden, these are some measures that can be taken, at least, not to allow this, not to have certain, to have certain measures against dealing with occupation, as everything that pertains to occupation, whether it's military, whether it's scientific, whether it's economic, whether these are things that can be taken and help to send the right message to the occupying power Israel.
And that's exactly why it's so important to increase the knowledge about the Palestinian cause, because I think one of the reasons for that development among the Swedish parties is the lack of knowledge, the lack of experience from the ground, and in combination with that that Netanyahu, he was a very smart person when it comes to actually market Israel among other countries on the government level, not on the public level. I mean, if you take a country like India, for instance, that almost always stood up for the Palestinians, how they changed foot during the last years. So he had been investing a lot in remarketing Israel, and that's why it's so important to work really hard among the Swedish parties and in the Swedish public opinion to increase the knowledge. And people must know what's happening.
I think one thing is
It's
how
true,
small country it is, that geographically, that both Israel and Palestine, I think I heard comparison that it's like Kiruna Kommun. So up here in the north, we have Kiruna, it's a town, but the Kiruna Kommun municipality, that it's about the same area geographically. So then you could see that this geographic area is so small compared to even Sweden, that you could fit so many countries of Israel and Palestine within this country we have. So
yeah, true. But also to follow up on what you mentioned, Daniel, don't forget that it's not just because Netanyahu was very, very clever. It's also a question of ideology.
Yeah.
Remember who is ruling India, and not just India. Who is ruling in Hungary? What's happening in the Czech? So this also, and that's why I'm very how shall I put this? Concerned. Concerned is the word. When I see here that, for example, more and more we're hearing that you can't say anything against Zionism because it's anti-Semitic. No, senor, it's not anti-Semitic. Zionism is an ideology, is a political, movement, and anti-Semitism is totally different thing.
Exactly.
So yes, everyone should be against all sorts of hatred and hate speech and discrimination, including anti-Semitism, of course. This is Islamophobia, all of this is totally rejected. But to start to conflate the two and mix the two is, I think, very, very scary. We should be very, very careful not to do this.
Yeah.
And I see this happening in Sweden,
Yeah.
and it raises concern. So it's not just about telling people what's going on. What's going on, they can find it out.
Yeah.
It's no secret. But the ideology, how you process this, who is influencing what, the rhetoric that is being used.
Yes.
I think we should be very, very careful regarding this.
Yeah.
we got a question from the chat about the blockade, or is it open now? Can they get medical supplies or vaccines?
Well, it's partially open, but yeah, it's partially open. It was difficult. For example, we had our minister for health. She just got back from Gaza, and she told us about the huge needs that exist. And she said that she wanted to be there on the second day of the last military assault on Gaza, but she wasn't allowed by Israel, of course. Some people tend to think that we don't have freedom of movement. We are totally under occupation, and this includes our frontiers, our borders, and the fact that there is this geographic separation of the Gaza Strip from the West Bank has helped and has been helped and encouraged, of course, by the Israeli side to continue. And this has managed to exacerbate the issue of the political division, inter-Palestinian division. But we continue to work on that. And by the way, the Israelis have blocked even Swedish politicians from going to Gaza.
Exactly.
Not now, but systematically for the past 5 years. And what I always say is that it is important to speak out against it. Sometimes it's needed. I know that diplomacy maybe doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it is important to say things the way they are, and even to your friends.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Now, time flies, and we have been discussing a lot of different topics the recent hour: Jerusalem, Gaza, the historic background, the Swedish-Palestinian relations, and also what's happening in other countries connected to the conflict. Maybe we have some time for 2 or 3 more Zoom questions and Facebook questions before we sum up this talk.
Yes, there were some questions on the same topic, that is maybe Palestinians living abroad, what they can do, and also if there are forced to return to Palestine, maybe sometimes by the Swedish government, that they don't have a permit to stay here, and the Swedish Migration Board have said that it is safe to return, and of course many people are worried about what will happen if they return, if they can return. Do you have any comments on those topics?
Yeah, I get some of those sometimes regarding those that are not allowed to stay and they have to go back. Now there are several, if you like, kinds of those that cannot stay and are forced to go back. If you say it's not safe, it means all of us living in the occupied Palestinian territory, state of Palestine, should leave. But that's not how it works. Those who have to go back either to the West Bank or to the Gaza Strip, they need to go back, I think. But sometimes there are illogical things, illogical rulings by the Swedish authorities for someone who cannot go back. He is not a resident. And they were born, let's say, in Syria or in Iraq or in Lebanon, and they cannot go back. And that's not because we don't want them. That's because Israel will not let them in, because they do not have a sort of a personal number with the Israeli records. According to us, all of this, we don't agree to it, because part of one of the core issues of this conflict is the dispossession of 1948, and therefore those who became refugees and now have travel documents for Palestine refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Egypt, from etc. So unfortunately, until now, these 7 million Palestinian refugees cannot practice their right to return,
Yes.
like any other
comment
person.
Also that they also mean the West Bank, so we didn't mention maybe as much as Gaza, but also if they
no, the West Bank. If they can go back to the West Bank, if they were residents of the West Bank before, of course they can go back to the West Bank. There is nothing to prevent them from that. They can go back. They will have, if their passport is expired or something, it can be renewed and they can go back. The problem, the real tragedy, is for those who are declined as asylum seekers or into Sweden and were not accepted for any kind of reason. They can't go back to Iraq. They can't go back to UAE. They can't go back to any other country they came from. But Israel will not allow them to practice their right to return. And this is one of the core issues of the conflict between us and the Israeli side.
Absolutely. Maybe one more question from Zoom?
No, I
Oh.
don't. I think we worked through the Zoom questions.
Oh, perfect. So, dear Ambassador, do you have any final thoughts? You wish to sum up this discussion? What's important for the next step? What should we as Palestinians in Sweden do?
Yeah, well, I think what we hope that all of us can do here, both friends of Palestine, those of Palestinian origin, Swedish citizens, of all walks of life. I think a lot, yes, can be done for Palestine. And the main thing is to remember that the same principles that you believe in should apply to Palestine and Palestinians. And the only reason why they don't is because of this colonial occupation that has got to end. Has got to end since, I mean, it was supposed to end before, and this huge injustice is a shame that we all need to work together, to continue to work together, and to push our politicians, your politicians, I mean, to do more for Palestine, to be brave and speak out for these principles that apply to all human beings and to all those who actually want to uphold the rule of law, multilateralism, international law, in order for us to live in a safer world.
So we had the last question is, how do you look upon the fair and just solution to this conflict? Is there such a solution that is ready to be made? How do you feel about the future?
Yes, of course. Of course there is, and the fair and just solution is what I just talked about just 2 minutes ago. A solution that is based in international law that ends this colonial occupation and this system of apartheid. And that is why it is the responsibility of this international community. Of course, we have to do our work, we have to do our homework. We again need the help of our friends, and we need to also reach out for those who don't know, and for those who, for one reason or the other, don't care. But I'm sure more care than not, because it's a matter of the basic concepts that I think everyone believes in: equality and dignity and justice and freedom is a right to everyone. And when we base our work on these principles, I think we gain more and more people that will also help us move together towards what we look for: freedom and independence.
Yeah. Thank you so much, dear Ambassador, for being with us today. Hope you come to Luleå soon again after the pandemic. And I hope all our discussions will increase the knowledge about the situation among the Swedish public and also among the parties. And hope you enjoy your summer, and talk to you soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this meeting. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for organizing this, and thank you to all those who were listening and watching, and those who sent out questions. And don't hesitate, I'll say to all of you in the public, to send me questions. If whenever I can also see those who would like to come and discuss again. And have a lovely summer, everyone, and hope to meet again.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank
And
you so much.
bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.